So for all intents and purposes, the 2024 election is effectively over. Donald Trump has won the presidency. Republicans command a majority in the United States Senate. And even though dozens of House races have yet to be called, the GOP is on track to keep their House majority. Much more likely than not, Republicans will have unified control of the federal government, the White House, the Senate, and they already have a 6-3 conservative supermajority on the United States Supreme Court. It's a big freaking deal, and it's dangerous, and it's scary. And I imagine a lot of you are exhausted and terrified. I'm exhausted at a bare minimum. I just got back from DC. I live streamed the election with my friend and peer, Luke Beasley. I saw chat. I felt what many of you felt. I totally get it. And I also see that many of you are unsubscribing. And it's not just me. I know it's Luke. I know it's David Packman. I know it's a lot of us seeing this kind of mass exodus. I totally understand. If you're exhausted from YouTube political commentary and politics in general, and you got to get away, fair enough. We'll be here when you get back. And for those of you who choose to remain, I'm going to continue to do political commentary after this election. I imagine now that we're out of the election and the electoral cycle, and dealing with the aftermath, the format is going to change somewhat, which I believe will hopefully be much better for both of us, me and you, the audience. But I want to be clear. Some liberal and progressive commentators, I think, are going to feel the need to downplay the significance of that, either because it makes them feel better or they're worried about making you feel better. But I want to be honest. I meant everything I said when I said that Donald Trump is a fascist. I meant everything I said when I said that the Republican Party is an authoritarian cult of personality with no limiting principle. And those same Republican politicians now have their hands gripped on the levers of power. It is dangerous. And if I pretended otherwise, I would have been lying. Either they weren't an authoritarian cult of personality, or if they are an authoritarian cult of personality, by definition, them being in power is dangerous, and it is. So, best case scenario, some people say, is Donald Trump was just all bluster when he talked about deportation and retribution and the enemy within and all that stuff. It was just to activate a radical base, just to get him back in power, just so he could not be held accountable for all the criminal stuff he did, right? All he's going to do is just, kill the investigations into him, maybe pardon himself and a select, handful of devout high priests in his cult. And then he's just going to golf for 4 years and leave us alone. Maybe. And maybe that is the best case scenario. But I would argue even that best case scenario is really, really bad, because we will have effectively rewarded a fascist like Donald Trump, the, quid pro quo with Ukraine, where he was trying to get a foreign ally to meddle in a domestic election. He mismanaged a COVID pandemic. He, blew up the deficit. He had disastrous policy, dangerous policy. He violated the Emoluments Clause. But more importantly, he was profoundly corrupt, and he tried to steal a free and fair election. And then he violated the peaceful transfer of power, even if all he does is just desperately want to escape accountability. And that's it. We have rewarded him for his bad behavior, for his dangerous behavior, for his anti-American behavior. And we have now incentivized it. Think about this. The Republican Party stood by Trump after he presided over a string of defeats: the 2018 midterms, the 2020 presidential election, the 2021 Senate runoffs, the 2022 midterms, the 2023 off-year elections, one Republican L after another. And they stood by their man. And in many ways, they, more fervently clung to him. And now, not only has he won, it's been a blowout. He's not only won the Electoral College. For the first time, Trump has won the popular vote. First Republican presidential candidate in 20 years, now since President Bush in 2004, to win a popular vote. You combine that with his Senate majority and his very probable House majority, he has a mandate to govern. MAGA Republicans are going to see this and be like, yes, more of this, please. More of Trump or Trump-like behavior. We have now incentivized the very behavior that we so dread and despise in Donald Trump. And that's a best case scenario. That's assuming Trump himself doesn't actually avail himself of all the newfound power, right? And of course, the Supreme Court presidential immunity decision, right? Which effectively insulates him from any sort of accountability, even after he leaves office in a second term, right? Set all that aside, we have now incentivized and rewarded that sort of behavior. What would a potential J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance, who will run, no doubt, for the presidency in 2028, what might he do? And what might the future J.D. Vance? This is where we are. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, all that happens and Donald Trump actually tries to follow through on his promises, to use the military against American protesters and his political opponents, to use the Justice Department to investigate and prosecute and convict his political opponents, to use the executive branch to punish media that he finds critical or distasteful. Mass deportations, carte blanche to foreign adversaries. Making the executive branch, a personality cult even more, stripping away employee protections, rolling back, climate change provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act, that passed under President Biden and Vice President Harris. Socially, climatologically, environmentally, like so many regressive policies that Donald Trump may actually actively try to implement. He's now in a position to do it. We are now crossing our fingers and hoping that Donald Trump, with no guardrails, no brake checks, and all the power in the world, will find the mercy within him to just be a fascist who wants to escape accountability, a lazy fascist who wants to escape accountability, and not a particularly malicious one. We are dependent on Donald Trump's largesse. A scary position, right? I don't know what he's going to do. I'm just saying that no matter what he does, even if he doesn't do anything that he's promised to do, that's really, really bad. It's still really, really bad. And for a lot of people, this could be a matter of life and death. There are people who died under Donald Trump's presidency because he mismanaged COVID. There were trans people and LGBTQ people and marginalized groups and minorities who suffered under Trump's regressive policies. And now he's in a position to do all that and then some. This is serious. And not everybody has the privilege of, escaping the brunt of the worst case scenario or being the last to suffer the worst case scenario. I get it. A lot of you are scared. You have every right to be. I'm just not going to sit here and make predictions. We have no idea what's coming. It could be bad. It could be terrible. It could be bad for a couple of generations. It could be bad long term. Because here's the other thing. That Supreme Court I mentioned, now that he is going back to the White House and now that he has an aligned Senate, Justice Thomas and Alito, they're going to retire from the United States Supreme Court. And Donald Trump has already appointed and confirmed 3 Supreme Court justices to the Supreme Court. Once they retire, Alito and Thomas, that'll give him 5, at least 5 total by the end of his second term. Donald Trump, at a bare minimum, will have created a MAGA majority United States Supreme Court by the time he leaves office, if he leaves office, at the end of 2028, at the beginning of 2029. That's where we are. So much of this is dependent on the mercy and the humility and the grace of the MAGA Republican Party, who heretofore have shown none. As a matter of fact, some people may be thinking, okay, again, they use this rhetoric to activate the base, but when push comes to shove, they're going to brake check Trump. They're going to check his worst impulses. Well, we have some evidence already that that's not true. Carolyn Leavitt, his spokesperson, told conservative media today at the time of recording that they plan on actually executing their mass deportation program, that they're putting the paperwork and the plans together. Marco Rubio, Republican senator from Florida, was asked, what about Donald Trump's more extreme cabinet proposals? What if he wants to make, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., anti-vaxxer extraordinaire, the secretary for Health and Human Services? Surely you wouldn't confirm that. That's crazy, right? Marco Rubio said, I imagine we're going to be quite deferential to a president who has won such a mandate. We have no reason, none at all, and every reason to believe the opposite, that they will actually not be a brake check to Donald Trump. That's where we are. So again, you guys have every right to be anxious and nervous. And again, I'm not here to downplay. I don't want to downplay. I'm not going to hype it up. I'm not going to downplay it. I'm just going to tell you the truth. And speaking of the truth, I'll say this too. Donald Trump can now say a majority of voters, a majority of people who turned out to vote, voted for him. At the time of recording, I think it's something like 15 million fewer people voted for Democrats than in 2020. President Biden won the popular vote by 81 million. And right now, I think Vice President Harris is like 66 million. 15 million fewer people turned out to vote. Why? We're still trying to figure that out. Data's coming in. There's going to be a lot of postmortem and analysis done, including on this channel, because we need to figure it out. And we need to be introspective, right? We have to recognize the faults and the issues with the opposing party, but we also need to do some serious soul searching and deep dives. What did we do wrong? What did we misunderstand? What did we, in terms of our actions, how do we screw up? We have to do that. We have to be introspective. But one thing I do want to say, nobody can say they were fooled. I mean, they can say it. They probably will say it, right? But Donald Trump is not an unknown quantity, right? He's not all bluster like he was. Like people in 2016 said, Donald Trump said some unhinged, crazy stuff, but he's never been president before. I'm sure he'll moderate. And in many ways, he didn't. He's been president. So we have 8 years of rhetoric. We have 4 years of his presidency. We have 8 years of him effectively running the Republican Party. People know who he is. And he's not shy, right? Again, I use pop culture references. He's not Emperor Palpatine in the Star Wars prequels where he pretends to be this benign statesman and is actually a narcissistic sociopath. In Star Wars terms, Trump has been Darth Sidious all along, openly and publicly. He's been the Sith Lord. He's been the heel. He doesn't try to hide who he is. And a majority of voters voted for him anyway. That's on us. To the extent that there's anything as collective guilt. I mean, we as a country chose this. Not all of us individually. Many of us not only voted against him, but door knocked and canvassed and, advocated. We actually put boots on the ground to door knock and try to change the outcome of this. We donated. A lot of us did that. A lot of you did that. And it's awesome, right? But it wasn't enough. Why wasn't it enough? We're going to try to figure that out. I just want to say this in conclusion. Not going to sugarcoat it. This is really bad. We're going to continue to do political commentary as long as it's possible here at Pondering Politics. Again, as we leave the horse race of the election, I expect the format will change somewhat. Maybe we'll do more live streams. Maybe we'll do more video essays. But I still plan on doing this. And I hope for those of you who still have some juice left in the tank that you stick around, you maintain your subscription, you like and subscribe, and then we kind of chart this path together. But for those of you who are just totally exhausted, I get it. Take care of yourself. We'll be here when you get back. And in the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.